GM, and welcome to the Rollup. Today's episode is with Jason from Story Protocol, and Story is building the programmable IP layer. IP is the practice of protecting our ideas so that someone else cannot pass off our ideas as their own. And traditionally, this has been done through a very slow, bureaucratic process of trying to get a patent. It occurs with a lot of back and forth, and it takes weeks, if not months or years. Jason recognized this, and so he decided to build Story Protocol to fix this problem. Patents just don't move as fast as we need them to in this new paradigm of ultimate idea propagation online. And so in doing so, Jason built Story Protocol, and he also built an idea economy. Because once we take our ideas and we tokenize them as IP, now we can combine them and compose them with all of the liquidity that's available on-chain and in DeFi. We talk about this idea economy as well as all of the enforceability that is necessary for tokenized IP. And we also talk through some of the history that dates back all the way to the printing press on why IP is important. I hope you enjoy this video. And before we get into it, first, a word from our sponsors that help make all of this possible. Enjoy.
Fuel achieves higher throughput by utilizing a novel UTXO-based approach that allows for parallelized execution. This design significantly accelerates transaction processing, which enables Fuel to handle vastly more transactions than non-parallelized systems. Thanks to advancements introduced by Fuel, Ethereum rollups are set to be more powerful than ever before. And Fuel is not just enhancing Ethereum rollups, it's redefining them, making them faster, more scalable, and more adaptable to meet the needs of modern applications and developers. Go to fuel.network, that's fuel.network, to learn how to build on the Rollup OS.
Welcome back to the Rollup. Here today with Jason Zhao, talking about programmable IP. Rob and I are big Pudgy Penguin guys, so this is an area of crypto space which we've kind of left unexplored on the Rollup, so we're excited. Jason, welcome in.
Doing great. Excited to get into it.
Yeah,
Awesome,
let's
man.
just do just that. Rob, let's jump into it. What is programmable IP? What does that mean, and what is like the history of IP?
Absolutely. So without going into a whole full-blown history lesson of IP, I think before even talking about what is programmable IP, it's important to just understand like what is this idea of intellectual property and how does that relate to crypto? So what I'll say is, at a high level, if you look at the history of intellectual property as an idea, it's not a natural idea, right? Like natural property or like physical property is very intuitive. So I have a house, it's on the beach. There's only so many houses that can be built on the beach. It's naturally scarce, right? And so there can only be 10 houses. Or if we build a high rise, there can only be 100 houses. So the idea of property itself started from physical property with natural scarcity. And intellectual property, ideas, creative works, patents, trademarks, they're not like that, right? If I have an idea and I whisper it to Robbie and then he goes and tells you and tells the rest of the world and posts on Twitter, I'm screwed because now everyone can use that idea. There's no natural scarcity. It's not like a beach. It's infinite. And so I think there's a very interesting property here. If you look at the history of technology, it really shapes also the history of intellectual property. So this idea of intellectual property wasn't invented until the Gutenberg press was invented. And what the Gutenberg press did was it just took ideas and made them infinitely replicatable, right? So now I can take someone else's work and just put it on this printing press and share it with the world, right? And when that happened, we needed a new way to incentivize people who are creatives, people who are trying to create new ideas, because otherwise they had, their ideas could be copied at scale. So with new technologies, like literally, a few years after the Gutenberg press, Statute of Anne was created, which is the first copyright laws. So with new technologies come the need for intellectual property. And now we're seeing this new era come in where with the internet and especially with generative AI, we're not just copying things anymore. If you go on ChatGPT, you ask it to write a poem. Yeah, sure, it's using data from the internet, but it's not copying anything that existed before. So our copyright system, literally the word copy is in there. It's completely broken now with generative AI. And you're seeing the sort of cracks at the edges, right? You have ChatGPT and OpenAI being sued by the New York Times for regurgitating things from the New York Times, even though it's behind a paywall. You're seeing interesting experiments that are also breaking the edges of the IP regime with things like SoundCloud remixes, having Drake's voice and The Weeknd's voice getting to #1 in a day. Right, there's this guy named Ghostwriter. He put out a song, Heart on My Sleeve, that went to #1 on SoundCloud, and neither Drake or The Weeknd were actually involved, but it was an amazing song, right? And with YouTube, there's Harry Potter in the style of Balenciaga, Harry Potter if Wes Anderson were the director. And these are great. These are amazing for creativity. But as you can see, like our current IP regime has no way of handling it. It's like a new Napster moment, right? Like the internet is inevitable. AI in creativity is inevitable. Like we cannot cease and desist and try to hammer down, like play this game of whack-a-mole. But at the same time, there's no value capture, right? Because if I'm J.K. Rowling, someone creates awesome Harry Potter and Balenciaga video, I don't get anything. That person doesn't get anything for all the effort they put in. We just have to take it down, right? So that's the current model. It's lose-lose for the creator and for the remixer. So can we create a new IP regime? Just like after the Gutenberg Press, we need a new IP regime. Can we create a new IP regime that introduces something that's native to the internet where we can have a win-win, where a creator can register their IP somewhere, have everyone be able to use it, remix it with their terms and their economic settings, and then allow both the creator and the remixer, and of course, this IP to grow like a network with network effects as a platform. So that's kind of the change that we're seeing now. And we like this infrastructure doesn't exist right now, which is why we have all these problems. And so as we enter this new era, really what we're trying to do at Story is introduce this idea of programmable IP. And we think just as the Gutenberg Press created this challenge that needed to be solved, programmable IP will be the sort of IP, internet native IP standard that will allow creators and also their communities to be able to monetize and sustainably grow the internet. So that's the idea at a high level. And I'm happy to dive deeper into exactly what that means.
Yeah, before we get too deep into the technical architecture of how you've constructed this coordination mechanism for programmable and programmable IP and kind of ownership of ideas. Before we get into that, let's just take a quick zoom out while we're still high level and talk about why ideas need to be owned. Like there's this thing of like collective consciousness. Like if I put out an idea, like it just kind of like generally benefits the zeitgeist. And then ultimately, maybe the person who executes on that idea first or best is the one that should kind of like have ownership over it. Why is it important to protect these ideas from a first principles perspective?
Absolutely. This is a really, really great question. And it comes at the core of some of the values that crypto has, because crypto is all about open source, open access, and sharing ideas. And so a lot of times when people think about IP, they think, oh, we're trying to gate ideas and prevent people from using them, right? So I think that at a high level, the mental model to have is there are two forces: the forces of openness, where everyone can make use of ideas, and that's a public good, and the force of innovation, where people are incentivized to create new ideas, right? And so if you have complete openness, everyone can use ideas. That's great. But then no new ideas are created, because why would you create a new idea when you have no incentive to do it, right? You might have some innovation on the margins, but really it's about incentivization. And that's, I think, a language that crypto, and blockchain people can understand. It's about having the right level of incentives and balancing that with openness, right? So if you have completely closed system where, you have a patent or copyright that lasts forever, then there's no, the society gets no utility from the IP because it's only used by one person. And so really, even though you're incentivizing this one person a lot to create an idea, society doesn't benefit from that incentive. So that's bad. But if you have a purely open IP regime, everything's totally open, then why would I go and create new drugs? Why would I go and create new art? Why would I go and create a movie? Because there's no way for me to keep doing that. So it's all about finding the right balance. And the way we think about programmable IP is very important, is that when you program something, you're setting the configuration, you're setting the settings for how you want it to be used. So on Story, you can go CC0. You can go full CC0 like Nouns. You can also go full Disney or like Web2 traditional media and not let anyone use your IP. But the magic, we think, is in the middle, where we allow people to say, look, you can use it under these settings, or if you pay me this much. And then, there can be a sort of organic Darwinian marketplace where people can say, hey, this sort of level of openness seems to work really well and people are really succeeding. This sort of seems too open. This seems not open enough. And for different creators, that they might have different tolerances. But the idea is to give people the ability to choose where they sit on the scale between openness and closed, and between, public value and private incentive.
Let's start with some definitions, because I think our audience may be a little bit unfamiliar with kind of like what C0 means, like how open or closed is that? And then Disney and kind of like what their current openness level is. And then once we just kind of like unpack that a little bit, I want to kind of use this frame of reference of incentives that you talked about leading into this, and highlight, if you would, the incentives that exist in, I'll call it trad IP. What is the current incentive model there? And then how is that similar or different from the incentive model in programmable IP?
Okay, I love that. So just to give everyone a primer, CC0 is basically a very common type of license used to give away all of the commercial rights and make IP completely open. So nouns is the great example of this. Anyone can use nouns. You don't have to have the NFT. You can literally right click save as. You can make money off of it. You don't have to share any of that money. Just think about CC0 as like the absolute most open you can get. As a creator, you create something, you're giving up all your rights to monetize that. Anyone can do what they want with the IP. They don't have to share any of the revenues. And so there's no moderation. So that's CC0. And then if you look at the way that Disney works, it's very different. So they're creating IP, with writers and artists, animators that they've hired, and then they're monetizing that IP in a single player way, right? So the company is distributing this and they deals with distributors. But the idea fundamentally is that the IP is an asset owned by one person, and that one person is the one that gets the benefit from that IP, right? They can show it to other people and monetize, but it's a very sort of single player mode. And so when you think about, what are the incentives in that single player mode, you'll see that the sort of cracks start to show. And the best way to see this is that you look at Hollywood, right? It's a fundamental question of, we have the best technology in the world now to create movies, to create music. We have generative AI, like you've seen the open AI models where you can create insane videos. So everyone has like godlike tools, and everyone has godlike distribution on the internet, right? So like I can go post a TikTok and tomorrow like tens of millions of people can see it if it goes viral. So why is Hollywood struggling? Like they should be the ones in the lead, leveraging this distribution, leveraging these tools. Yet last year, six months out of the year, there was a massive strike of all the writers, right? And all the actors in Hollywood. And so clearly the economics of storytelling are broken, because the incentive model, what happens when you have the single player model is you're incentivized to basically protect your IP and to not let other people build on top of it, because that could be stealing, your upside. And what happens is you get into this war because attention has become super scarce on the internet, right? So now if like, let's say I'm Netflix, right? I'm a more traditional model. I create a show. I'm competing for attention with my IP with every other show on Netflix. I'm competing with TikTok. I'm competing with Amazon Prime. I'm competing with Apple TV. I'm competing with movies. I'm literally competing with anything that could attract people's attention. So how do I compete? What are my incentives? I need to get as many eyeballs as possible, but I can't do that organically. So I have to pay for ads. So you have this huge problem in the economics of traditional storytelling in single player mode, where you have ever rising customer acquisition costs, where for every dollar that you earn, 99 cents needs to go back into this ruthless battle for attention in the advertising game. So it's not like these traditional studios are evil or stupid. It's just that 99 cents out of the dollar needs to go to ads, and only 1 cent can go to the creators. So
Jason,
single player.
Can I pause you just real quick, because I'm sure you could keep going for a while here.
I want to just draw a quick analogy to like the way that IP and advertising works in that traditional sense, and like the block supply chain on a blockchain, because I can see how on a blockchain you have these block builders that are bidding for transactions. They're bidding for transactions. In the traditional IP world, you have these companies that are bidding for eyeballs in this attention economy. And then you end up squeezing all of the value that ends up getting created, because you have to once again bid for that cost of the eyeball, cost of attention. Similarly, in blockchain, in MEV, you're bidding on these transactions. You're trying to get this order flow or this attention flow in a blockchain world so that you can fulfill that. And similarly, you're bidding on this attention so that you can fulfill that user's request for some sort of content or entertainment. And so I think it's very cool, because we haven't quite seen this convergence play out yet. But please continue. Cartesia is your home for app-specific rollups. At the forefront of developing new tools and platforms that enhance the capabilities of blockchain technology, Cartesia enables applications that are flexible and built to scale. Build on a full Linux environment and use traditional software libraries, but in blockchain development. Go to cartesia.io, that's cartesia.io, to learn more about building your own app chain today.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll wrap up, because I do want to talk about the tech as well and exactly what programmable means. But so that's the single player mode. You kind of have to, as Robbie, you put it, you have to be in this ruthless war and you have to bid for attention. And the problem is like why can't we market IP like Facebook? Why can't IP have network effects? Why can't it be a platform? Because Facebook never spends money on marketing, right? Like in the early days, people just joined, right? And the more people joined, the more valuable the network became. People just advertise it themselves. So why can't IP have those effects? In order to have those effects, IP needs to be multiplayer. IP needs to grow into a network. So you need to go out of the single player mode and have the ability to share the upside and the rights in your IP to other people. This goes back to what we're talking about with AI. Like, imagine if I could create a new franchise, and instead of shutting people down when they create AI remixes of it or when they contribute fan fiction to it, we can actually give them some upside, some economic incentives, and skin in the game to go and create different versions of that world. So we think this is going to really supercharge IP and create a new economic model, and that crypto is the best way to do that. So that's kind of what we see as a difference is, can we use programmable IP to turn IP from single player, high cost, to multiplayer network effects?
So talk us through the incentive mechanism here. Like, talk us through the new economy that comes out with programmable IP in multiplayer mode.
Yeah. I'm really glad you used the word economy, because the way that, like, the best way to describe what this looks like is to make a comparison to DeFi. And we're very inspired at Story by what DeFi did for money. And so that's actually where we took this term, is programmable money. And I think everyone in crypto understands that intuitively. What is programmable money? It's like the difference between this dollar bill I have in my wallet and a USDC or USDT. And it's the same value, right? I'm not going to buy more or less with that dollar. But now, because this dollar is transformed into software, because it's programmable, I can have this entire parallel financial ecosystem that's limited only by the powers of software, right? Like, I can swap this USDC on Uniswap for ETH, stake that ETH on Lido, get staked ETH, put it into Compound, get Compound staked ETH. All of these are just independent pieces of software that, like, amplify what I can do with my money. And they're all composable and they're all open. But if you think about IP, right? And we've talked a lot to Pudgy, we've talked a lot to the Zuki team. Like, we're very close with these teams that are building some of these cool IP franchises. If you want to actually transact IP, it's still very off-chain, right? Like, imagine that I wanted to create like a comic with you guys, and I have a Pudgy and you guys have an Azuki, right? What would I do? I would go read this license that's on a website for my Pudgy. I had to understand what the hell that means. Then I would go look at your license for your Azukis to figure out, okay, what can I do? Then I have to get in touch with you guys and work something out on a deal. Who gets 50% of the comic? Do you get 20%? What are the rights? Can I use your IP in this or that way? And then we need to actually codify that in a legal contract that none of us know how to make. So basically, like, this is the same as if I wanted to swap on Uniswap, I had to go call my banker and find a counterparty. And then, Robbie, you have to go call your banker. Andy, you have to go call your banker. And then we make that deal happen. So yes, you can move media on chain, but we haven't moved the rights on chain. Okay. And IP is not just media files. It's media files plus rights, the rules for engagement. So what programmable IP is, and what we're doing at Story is allowing people to not just bring like this media file, this image of a penguin or of an Azuki, but also all of how other people can use that IP and license that IP and remix that IP on chain. So you'll see the terms for, how much do you need to pay to use this IP? Where can you use a license? Who can create derivatives? If you generate revenue, how much revenue do you have to share with the original? All of that is on chain. So you almost have an API for rights embedded in every single piece of content on the internet. That's our goal. Every piece of content on the internet, whether it's music or art or story, has like almost like a file or an API, an interface attached to it that allows other people, whether it's a program or a person, to see how they can use it. And so in this new analogy, like, if your IP is registered, if your Pudgy is registered on Story and my Azuki is registered on Story, I just look through the Story universal IP database and I can see, oh shit, this is like a really cool IP and I want to use it. And here are Robbie's terms. Click a button, pay my ETH, get a license, and boom, I'm off to the races, right? So there's no intermediate.
So Story is like its own blockchain. It's its own like layer. Is it a roll up or is it its own L1?
Yeah, great question. So Story has two components, and the second component is actually something that we're just now announcing. So we're really excited to share with you. But the first component is the protocol. So the protocol is where all the core logic happens of what I just talked about. That is a set of smart contracts, currently EVM compatible. So we can deploy that on any really EVM compatible blockchain. But the really important part is we've also built a Story network. And so the Story network is essentially the world's first composable, programmable IP ecosystem. So we want this to be the go-to place, the sort of canonical location for all IP to be registered on chain. And so we've natively deployed essentially a blockchain solution where the protocol is a first-class citizen. So IP registration is built into the network, really, really cheap gas costs through data availability with Celestia. So we have all of these different features, native account abstraction. So everything is by default Web2 UI if creators want it to be. We even created native precompiles that allow people to sign on mobile. And so developers have access to basically the top set of tools, gas fees that are extremely low, sub-cent, even at millions of transactions, and this native IP infrastructure attached to this blockchain. So we really want this to be the sort of IP hub or the IP layer of the internet. And that's kind of what we're building. So Story is, to summarize, the smart contracts plus this blockchain that we're building that's focused on IP.
It's amazing. With Celestia underneath, millions of transactions, sub 1 cent, almost magical. Love the architecture that you described, Story protocol and Story network. walk us through what an example could look like, because Andy and I are both penguins. You mentioned Exukis, like NFTs are still thriving, especially in some of the core communities for each of these chains. I've seen Pudgies have this platform where you can kind of apply, and then the centralized Pudgy company could choose your Pudgy and make a plush. I've actually got one. I think you can see it. It's right there, and it's a little tiny. It's a little tiny guy.
Yeah.
But they're making these, and they're picking and choosing which NFTs they're going to use to turn into these physical toys.
Yep.
So let's say I'm a toy company. I'm not Pudgy the company, but I want to use NFTs, and I want to maybe make a physical Azuki toy or a physical Milady toy. How might those companies engage with NFT holders and use the Story protocol or the Story marketplace to exchange IPs and form engagements?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think what we're trying to do, and Overpass, what you mentioned with Pudgy, it's an awesome example of like the types of interactions we want people to have. We're close with Luca. We know how much work the Pudgy team put into that. That was something that's only available to, one of the top NFT collections. They spent months building it, super complex. So really, like, this is only, the top 1% of projects can actually do this, right? And same with Hollywood. Like, if you're a Hollywood studio, okay, you don't have to worry about licensing. You have 100 lawyers. All the people you're licensed to have 100 lawyers. So this is not for the top 1%, right? But even for Pudgy, it was very difficult to build that. And it took a lot of custom architecture, a lot of legal work, like, had to talk to lawyers, create custom licenses, things like that. What we want to do is one click, no one has to worry about the legal. No one has to worry about the tech. What happens in the example you gave is we don't even need the Zuki team to be on board, although, I think they would be. But the idea is you're an Azuki holder. You have the rights to your Azuki, this really cool innovation where you have IP as an NFT. You just register on the Story protocol. Now you set your terms for how you want other people to use it. Now, literally any application that's connected to Story protocol can surface this entire universe of your IP, of everyone else's IP, whether it's a game that's leveraging these IPs for skins, whether it's some sort of NFT marketplace, whether it's a licensing like IPFi, DeFi sort of tool where your IP can be used as collateral. Every app that's connected to Story now has access to your Azuki, and it can see the terms that you've set, right? So you can imagine something like Overpass, but built for every NFT collection, where they can just pull, like, from an API, all your Azuki, everyone else's stuff. They can surface your terms, and then anyone else, whether it's a studio, a game, whatever, that wants to use your IP, just clicks a button and they get a license automatically. And that license is also an NFT. It can be traded, it can be fractionalized, it can be used as collateral. So there's this whole sort of financing market as well around IP, which is literally like hundreds of billions of dollars market, but super locked up asset, right? So there's also a real world asset angle, an RWA angle to this, where you can actually start making liquidity and price discovery for IP as well by registering on Story.
What might these terms look like? Give us some ideas. Yeah,
so the terms can get extremely complex. We built like a programmable IP license. Think about it as a YC safe of Story protocol, where it should work for 99% of use cases, but if it doesn't, you can bring in your own license into the protocol. But for most people, the programmable IP license or the PIL is going to have most of the options they need. And that has like 15 different terms that you can set, like region, upfront fee, all these other things that you can set. That's probably too complicated for most people. So we've also created like very, very simple presets. So you don't have to worry about the details if you don't want to. But just to give you an example of some of the core variables, one is upfront fee. Like, how much does it cost to generate a license? You can set this as high or as low as possible. You can also let a DeFi protocol set it for you. So like hooks, very similar to Uniswap v4. So it can be a variable pricing scheme or like a bonding curve or something like that. Upfront fee and then is this a commercial derivatives or non-commercial derivatives? So if I have a license, can I just use it for my own like use cases, but not make money off of it? Or can I make money off of it as well, right? Getting this license. And then downstream of that is, if I can make this commercial, like if I get a license, I can earn revenue from it. What percentage of the revenue do I need to share? So some of those economic terms are really important. And I think that's what we really focused on.
Yeah, because the economy is like, it also has to be programmable, right? And I imagine that a lot of the sales that occur from licensing these IPs, whether you turn it into a movie or a game or a physical toy, a lot of those sales are going to happen off chain. So how do you enforce these revenue share agreements between NFT holder and company that creates something with that IP? How do you enforce that the incentives do end up going to the NFT holder?
Yes. So in the on-chain setting, this is easier, right? As you alluded to, because we can actually see what's going on. We built a royalty module that essentially, once a license agreement's been set in stone, creates a wallet where you can funnel the royalties into, and then because we have this whole IP graph, right? Like there can be 3 layers of derivatives. They can branch out. It's very complex. But our royalty module, basically, if money comes into any of the edges of the graph, it will flow appropriately through the graph and will handle all of that logic for you, whether the graph is 100 deep or 2 deep, right? So if it's on-chain, it's simple. But as you asked, what do we do when I like create a t-shirt collection within Azuki?
Like how do you enforce that?
Yeah, exactly. So there's different layers to this. The first is that there's a happy path, right? The happy path is even for off-chain revenues, we have a wallet created every time you generate a license where the money from that deal should go. So number one is if you're a good actor, you want to follow the rules, you can put it in there, and essentially it's just as if you created on-chain revenue, right? That's the happy path. And I wouldn't discount that, like especially in crypto, people discount that, but think about Getty Images, Shutterstock. These are both multi-billion-dollar businesses. If I go on Getty, I can screenshot anything, right? Like, and it's easy to get rid of the watermark, but people don't want to break the law. So like, it's not profitable to do that. So there's a happy path. That's the first layer. The second layer is we built a dispute module. So if you notice that you've created a deal, and this is a decentralized, we've created incentives around people being able to dispute, just like, liquidators in a lending protocol. So anyone can dispute, but if you notice that someone is not doing what they agree to, including this royalty payments, you can dispute them. And if that dispute is successful, we shut down the ability for that IP to generate revenue. And there's a reputational element as well. And then that is no longer shown on the API level. Like we're never going to censor IPs on the protocol level, but on the API level, we won't show it. And that's the second level of escalation, which is on-chain disputes. The final level is, and this is why the programmable IP license is important, these are actually binding legal contracts, right? This isn't like some sort of on-chain game that we're playing. It's real legal contracts. We've created one-to-one to match with our on-chain logic. So in the worst case scenario, someone is not paying you a significant sum of money, you can go and take it to court. And we've worked very, very hard with legal teams to make sure that this is something that's enforceable. So the worst case scenario in Story is the best case scenario for creators today, which is someone screws you over, you have to go to the court. So we have different layers of escalation, and we try to move as much of it on chain, but in the final analysis, like you can still, it's still legally binding.
So in that middle part, if you can dispute, it means that you need a dispute resolution process.
Yes.
And so oftentimes on-chain DAOs or protocols will use social consensus in resolving those disputes. You can think to Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. Should we or should we not blacklist this person's tokens? And they asked the Ethereum community, everyone voted using their Ethereum tokens, and they ended up hard forking away Ethereum Classic's tokens. And so social consensus calls for a token. And so feel free to answer this if you like, but I was going to retract this question because it sounds like you don't need a token to enforce social consensus or dispute resolution in this mechanism. You actually rely on legal agreements to enforce social consensus. You go to like a normal legal proceeding to enforce whether or not this dispute should be resolved in one way or the other. You don't need to rely on like how a tokenized community would vote. You can rely on how like a jury would vote. And so I think it's an interesting like element of like almost like it's an interesting element of modularity because we haven't seen like off-chain or modular social consensus quite yet. And you guys are plugging that in, which is fascinating to see how this is going to play out.
A quick comment on there. I think you exactly pointed out there needs to be a dispute policy. So the way we built our protocol is extremely neutral, composable, pluggable, modular. And so when you register an IP, you choose what dispute policy you want to use when your IP gets disputed. So we have a default Story protocol policy, but think about things like Claros, like UMA, or even it can be a completely off-chain policy if you want. So you select the dispute policy that will be triggered when your IP gets disputed, and other people can see that as well. So if I see like you've registered your Azuki, but the dispute policy I don't trust because it's all off-chain, I won't license your work. Like it's just a marketplace of trust. That's what we're building. And so you're right that not all of the dispute policies will involve a token. Some of them can have can be from a DAO that has a token, or you can create a separate token just to create some sort of voting scheme for a specific dispute policy. So there's many different options when it comes to dispute policies, but that's all transparent. So you can decide whether you trust it or not before you build on an IP.
Yeah, very cool. Shout out UMA guys. I mean, they're building some really general, flexible tech. And it's really cool to see this use case.
Navigating multiple blockchains can be complex and cumbersome. Let's say you want to deposit into a lending market on Polygon because they have the best rates, but you only have funds on Optimism. So you bridge your funds to Polygon only to realize that you need Matic to pay for gas. Maybe you use a centralized exchange, or you ask a friend to pay for the gas, but only then can you finish your transaction. In a chain abstracted future powered by Connext, this is not the situation. You can connect your wallet to any dApp from any chain with all the complexities of swapping, bridging, and depositing, all completely abstracted behind the scenes. Head over to connext.network, that's connext.network, to learn more about Connext's Chain Abstraction Toolkit.
I just had one last question. Yeah, we'll
Of course.
that up.
Yeah.
You said that you had talked to the Penguin community. Is that something that could be a possibility in the future where, Pudgy Penguins or other NFT collections could utilize Story like permissionlessly to have my penguin be used in movies or books or etc.?
So actually, if you're a Penguin holder, you can literally register your Penguin on Story now. It's on testnet, of course, but once we go on mainnet, you don't need permission from anyone, right? This is the true nature of programmable IP. It's just like with DeFi. Like you have the token, it's yours, right? And you can do whatever you want. So as a Pudgy holder, you can register your IP, set your terms on Story, and literally anyone can already license it. That being said, like I said, we've had many conversations with the Pudgy team. So there's a possibility that something cool could happen there. And we've talked to a lot of the other top collections in the space. So this is something we're very looking out for. But like I said, you don't need permission from these projects, right? You just need to be able to have the IP yourself. But on the project level, I think there could be some cool collaborations as well.
Awesome. Jason, thanks so much for coming on, man. This was something I think a lot of people had been thinking about, and it seemed pretty intuitive. And so it's very, very cool to see it finally come to fruition.
Definitely.
Of course.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the time, guys. Appreciate it.
Cheers, man.